First of all, I have two best friends. One of them was Emily. And just a week before, she told me exactly where her hide key was.
Wow.
And so I went to her place and knocked on her door. And her dog started barking very loud, of course, protecting her. And she didn't answer. And so I went and got the hide key. And I went in and I found her deceased.
Hold up, real quick. Like, subscribe, comment below, and follow us on Instagram and TikTok at the Geena the Latina Show. Okay, let's get back to the show. You know, today's episode is one that it's close to home. It's also hits close to home to every single living person. I can't believe I haven't done an episode on this in season 1 because it's such a big part of my story. It's about grief and it's about death. And death is something that we are all going to have to face no matter what, right? And when I wanted to talk about, and I'll go into a little bit what happened with my brothers. I had 2 brothers murdered. We'll go into a little bit. I was trying to think of like, who is the best person to bring in for this? And Amy is my friend. Can you hold my hand? She's one of my best friends. I love her. I'm already going to start crying because you're so, okay. Amy is so emotional. She's an end-of-life doula. Can you explain what an end-of-life doula is? Because people are like, what the heck is that?
Sure. End-of-life doulas give emotional and spiritual support for folks that are at the end of their life, including their family. They don't do any medical support. Ram Dass is known for saying, we all walk each other home. And I feel like that's kind of what I've described in my role as end-of-life doula. I'm helping walk somebody home. So there's guidance, there's support, and also normalizing death.
Yeah.
Because in our culture, most folks, until you're dealt with it, that somebody you're close to or themselves normally don't even talk about it.
Yeah.
So how do you even meander it?
Right.
And just one other little tidbit on it is hospice is absolutely wonderful. The hospice movement. I find that end-of-life doulas can help bridge the gap of what they don't provide for, just based on a structure. Nothing done, nothing wrong.
So it's like kind of an addition to, so I know just from, because you're my friend and you've helped me with so much stuff in my life. But like, say someone knows they're going to die in a year or so. So you not only help the patient, you help the family. Hold up, pause. We got to take a second to acknowledge our food sponsor, Cravings Fruit Bar. Miguel, Fidel, what's up? They're out in Santee. If you live here in San Diego, they got tons of stuff. They've got fruit, chocolate covered strawberries. They got tortas. They got chamoy, everything. Follow them at Cravings Fruit with a K, at Cravings Fruit. All right, let's get back to the show. Because so many times someone dies and then at the funeral, you're saying all these great things, but that person didn't get to hear all that stuff when they're living. Not that they can't, because I believe they can on the other side, but like, why don't we take the time to do these things? Because people are afraid of death. So even if you know someone's going to die, you're not doing these things. Like, we should do this while we're alive, right? So you kind of facilitate that.
What doulas can do, it is, we get to choose how we want to die. It's like, you know, a lot of people may not have heard of an end-of-life doula. It's the other bookend to, let's say, a birth doula. Why aren't we celebrating the end of life as much as we celebrate birth?
Yeah. And it is a celebration so many times, obviously, and we're going to go into a little bit of death that a big bet that we've undone, but it's like, why are we not celebrating the life? You know what I mean?
I believe it's our culture that I believe our culture and society just isn't educated, really.
And like, no one wants to talk about death, you know? And so that brings me to, so like, and then the thing that I come talk about, and everyone deals with death differently. That's one thing that I have learned, and nothing is right or wrong, right? And so what came to mind right now, and I'm just gonna share, is like, like my mother, she's not it's been 20 years since my brothers were murdered, and it's really hard for her to talk about it. And so we just don't talk about them in front of her. And had maybe she had someone like you, or or other people, like maybe we could come to terms with it a little bit more, because I think it's very important to celebrate their life. I just started celebrating my brother's birthdays like a year ago. Like I went 19. It's been 20 years since they were killed, and I never like celebrated their birthdays. You know why? You know what I mean? It's just because we're taught, like, even after they die, that it's kind of like, yeah, we love them, but like I don't know what it is, right? And so I wanted to share my story, you're going to share your story about your friend, and they're two different things, but they're the same kind of, and it's like anyone that lost someone knows that it's a thing you'll deal with for the rest of your life, right? And it's how you deal with it. So for me, I had a brother who was 17 years old, Matthew, and he was a senior in high school, played football. He went to a party, like a flyer party where you pay to get in. And he had known the guy at the door, the girl at the door from junior high or something, was running his mouth. I'm not sure exactly what happened, but the boyfriend got mad. He was on a bunch of drugs. He went in the party and shot and killed my brother Matthew. He was 17 years old. He never got to go to prom, live a life. Like, he was barely a senior in high school. My other brother, Steven, was with him when that happened. So he witnessed his brother being shot and killed. And 6 months, sorry, later to the day, my brother was, it was like 2 o'clock in the afternoon, 3 o'clock in the afternoon. He went to play basketball at a local gym where we grew up. And there was, and I'm only explaining like this because in court, the kids that were describing, because it was an after school program at the gym, and there was 3 black guys and 3 Mexican guys. This little kid is the one describing this on the court, and the 3 Mexican guys wanted to play with the 3 black guys basketball. They didn't want to. They went off their separate ways, and then one of the black guys went to the like where the bleachers were, pulled out a gun and shot my brother in the gym in front of like 50 little kids. The kid that shot him was only 14 years old. My brother was 19 years old. My brother Stephen was 19. He had 2 kids at the time, and he was pronounced. They were killed 6 months to the day and almost to the time, and they were like best friends, right? So that's crazy. So that was 20 years ago, and I will say that I've done a lot of work on myself, and death is something that will affect you for the rest of your life, right? And I'm not saying, and how you choose to see it and deal with it, because I've definitely seen family members who have not dealt with it and who have turned to alcohol or drugs or all these things because they're not dealing with it, right? To this day, 20 years later, right? But then I've seen someone, I say like me, and again, I have moments where you came on set and I cried, but then yet I could tell the story about my brothers without crying. It's just like day to day, your feelings change. And this is someone who's done a lot of work on herself, who it's 20 years later and it still affects me heavily. And so I wanted to bring you on the show, obviously, because you have your quote unquote expertise, but even with your quote unquote expertise, no one is prepared for death. Even an end of life doula is not quote unquote prepared. And I'll let you talk about it. Not prepared, but it's just something that we all have to deal with. But how can we get to a point where we can deal with it as best as we can, right? So thank you, first of all, for sharing your story about Emily. It's more recent, right? And I couldn't imagine sharing what happened with my brothers. I didn't even talk about it for a few years. So the fact that you're here sharing it so quickly is a testament to you also. But I think it's important to share her story because that's, we've talked a little bit. It's like sharing her legacy, right?
Correct.
So tell us a little bit about Emily.
Okay. And before I do, I just thank you for having me on here. A couple people were like, "Aren't you excited?" And I'm like, no.
This is really out of her comfort.
No, but because of the topic. I'm grateful and honored to be here. And of course, I'm going to say yes. And the reason why I did was twofold, and they're equally as important to me. One is by sharing my story and being vulnerable, it will be healing for me in some way. I don't know how yet. And equally as important is sharing my story about my friend who I lost. I believe it'll be part of her legacy. If this conversation could bring light or education or motivation or healing to anybody, I find that as a ripple effect of my friend Emily, who I lost in February.
In February, and we are now in October. So this year.
Yes.
So pause. It's Geena the Latina. Okay, so what you need to do right now, if you're liking the content, is you need to like, subscribe, and comment, because we want to keep this show going. We need to like mess with the algorithm a little bit. So if you like the show, help us out a little bit, and make sure you follow us at TikTok and Instagram at the Geena the Latina Show. Okay, let's get back to it. Do you want to tell us what happened, or I'll let you lead on that? Like, I don't know how much you want to share or
Okay.
not share.
What I will say is, you touched on this as maybe somebody who's an end-of-life doula can still not be prepared.
Yes, right?
So people would often say, well, how do you do that? And I would always say, well, when it's not your family or loved one, it's different when you go to the bedside. But my story, there was no bedside. I had, first of all, I have two best friends. One of them was Emily. The other one's her aunt. And Emily and I had Galentine's Day plans. And she never flaked. She may have overslept, but it was unlike her.
And how old is she at this time?
37.
37.
And she was like my younger sister. We had that kind of energy and bond where she was my best friend, but yet more than that, like family, like just a deeper connection than just a regular friendship. And we had plans, and I didn't hear back from her, and I would text her sporadically saying, I'm not mad at you. It's really unlike you to kind of flake, but I'm not mad. And my last text message to her was, if you don't let me know you're okay, I'm coming over and I'm pounding on the door. Like, I'm coming in hot. I watched too much Dateline. And that's what I said.
Yeah.
And just a week before, she told me exactly where her hide key was.
Wow.
And so I went to her place and knocked on her door. And her dog started barking very loud, of course, protecting her. And she didn't answer. And so I went and got the hide key. And I went in and I found her deceased. And as an end-of-life doula, of somebody who has spent hundreds and hundreds of hours near the bedside, there's no fucking way you could be prepared for that at all.
Right.
At all.
Yeah. And we talk about this as a lot. It's like you're never can be prepared for death. Right. And so I think a lot of people, when they lose someone, they feel like they need to act a certain way or recover or afraid to cry or whatever. Like, no one knows what they're doing, even an end of the life doula, right? And there is a difference between, I mean, death is death, but like knowing you're going to die and an unexpected young person.
And that's the thing. It was an unexpected, tragic death, and traumatic for me in a way, being the one that found her, but also an honor and a privilege. When you love somebody so much, I believe one of the biggest acts of love is being there for somebody at their last breath, whether you know them or not. And that's tough with your loved ones. And I didn't get the opportunity with her, but I got the opportunity to, even in my shock, give her a loving send-off.
Yeah. So after this, obviously it's very fresh.
It's fresh. And I'm going through grief. My heart is broken. And there is still an aspect of shock. And I'm actually grateful for however we're designed, our bodies and minds, because it's helping me with my grief, that it's not all at once. If it was all out at once, I probably wouldn't leave my house for days.
Yeah. And a lot of people, this happens and they don't know what to do. Like, for example, I've had family members and friends like turn to alcohol, turn to drugs to numb the pain. I remember when my brothers died, I would like just go party and just not think about it. I feel like you process it well enough. You know what I mean? Like how could you help someone what would you tell someone who may have lost someone? Like, what are some of the things you do to process this or to feel? Because I think you're one of the most in tune person with their emotions and you let it be. What would be something that if they're watching right now and they need some help, like, what do I do? I don't want to turn to alcohol and drugs. I don't want to turn to these bad things,
I would say at least enough time's gone by for me to know what has worked, because it has not been easy, but there's been beautiful and loving aspects as well to my process. It's about relationships, human connection, and love. And part of it is through beautiful healers that I have that I can share everything with, dump the hard stuff that I either don't want to or it's not right to burden friends with, but you also need support.
Yeah.
So I would say to somebody who's going through it, find a grief counselor, find a support group.
So what's a grief counselor? Because some people may be watching and have no clue what the heck is a grief counselor.
Well,
Like, is this something you could Google and find?
yes.
See?
So it's like a therapist who would specialize in grief. So as an end of life doula, I don't know grief. So a lot of people associate it with the same thing. Sure, there's connected things and commonalities, but it's a different beast.
So grief counselor.
Yeah, grief counselor, and really leaning on who's supportive in your life.
Mhm. I wanted to touch on this too, because we talked about this off camera a little bit, is like when I always used to say, I don't wish this on my worst enemy, right? I truly don't. Like death and losing someone unexpectedly, you do not wish that on anyone, no matter how much, whatever. I don't have an enemy anymore, but I used to say that, like worst enemies, right? But people don't know how to react to people who just lost someone, right? And if had I not lost someone, I don't think, because a lot of people are like scared to reach out or like, and I remember that from before. And then when I was going through my brother's died, I remember this one girl who I wasn't really even friends with her. I thought we had like beef before, and she reached out, and that meant so much to me. Right. And it was a simple like, hey, just checking in, blah, blah, blah. But a lot of people like don't reach out because they're afraid, like, oh, I don't want to, blah, blah, blah. They're scared. So someone who's recently gone through it, how would I know, like, how are people, what would help you in people's reactions? Because I know some people were let down by people's non-reactions also.
Yeah, and even things that have been said to me have been triggering. And it took me a little while to work through it because it was, wait a minute, this is about their stuff, not mine.
Yeah.
And then I realized there was a common denominator. And this is my opinion, at least in my process, the common denominator why either people said the wrong thing, a triggering thing, haven't shown up, whatever it is that has not been helpful. I go back to our culture and our society. People don't know how.
Yeah.
And I will say, I don't know either. As an end of life doula. So meaning.
How about in your experience? What is someone that you feel like was there for you? What did they do versus someone who wasn't there for you? What did they do? Because maybe that will help someone who's watching who maybe has experienced it themselves, but their best friend is. And like, what do they do?
I think people just showing up. And, if I'm going through a bad grief wave or having a hard day and I don't respond to a text or whatever, just knowing that people are thinking of you and are there, or how can I support you?
So it's like a text, how can I support you?
Yes.
That's easy. And a lot of people don't even do that because they're afraid. It's like you lose someone and that's like faux pas. Like I don't like they lost someone. I don't want to no,
or
that's when they need you.
I have had friends and family members who haven't even acknowledged it. Not even I'm thinking of you. So if it's too fearful or it brings up their own grief to talk about, that's okay. But that's been interesting.
Like that people haven't even reached out and said anything.
And that's okay. It's another time in life where you know who's going forward with you. But also, just because somebody hasn't reached out to me doesn't mean that I don't want to be in their life anymore. It could be about they can't face their own grief.
Yeah.
And that, I have a spiritual director, a somatic coach, and a grief counselor.
Yeah.
And these 3 women have been so significant every time I'm triggered or going through something, and they help reflect back to me, and I'm able to heal it and wait for the next thing.
So explain what you said. We talked about a grief counselor, which you have. What is a somatic coach, if someone may not know what that is?
Somatic coach, she helps. I'm probably not going to describe it the best of how she would, but going into the body and emotions in the body too, and working through things that way. So a lot of people say, change your mind, change your life. Well, not if you don't. There's stuff stored in the body, and
Yeah.
the body's wisdom we can tap into. So she's helped me with that.
So for me, I know that I've had other issues. If you haven't go back and listen to our episode on periods. But I had fibroid tumors grow, and the doctor may tell you, oh, we don't know, right? And it could be your fluid, it could be estrogen. I think part of it was my deep trauma that I haven't dealt with, right? So grief, like when someone dies in your life, especially unexpectedly, you may think you're okay, but it is trauma stored in your body. And if you don't release that trauma somehow, it's going to come out in cancer and in tumors. That's for me, it was best case scenario. I didn't die. Some people will can die because they have not released.
Yeah, what you're still holding on to.
Yeah. How have and you're great at that. Could you explain that like very 101 for someone doesn't understand? What do you mean? Like, how do I, like, if they're experiencing a death right now, they're going through all the grief, but they also, it's really important, I feel like, to start getting that out. What's some basic ways someone's new to this that they can deal with the trauma and try to release it in healthy ways?
Great question.
There's so many. I know journaling comes to mind. But
journaling and really tapping into your body's wisdom. But the other thing is it could be overwhelming. So like if I had this somatic coach in place before my friend died. So if I didn't have those tools already, it may have been too overwhelming perhaps to go in my body.
Yeah.
But I can give an example of how I worked through something recently. It's a trauma.
Okay.
So first of all, I am open to or doing my best to surrendering to my grief. As of now, I have not had any stored trauma from finding my friend deceased. I believe that I might not because I acted in love, meaning I went and loved her before I called 911. I talked to her, I caressed her, I kissed her multiple times on her forehead. The scene didn't matter. It was love.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until a few weeks ago, I've started a grief course because I'm trying to go deep for my own healing.
And there are grief courses. If you Google them, they're all around. You could sign up. It's like a class, right? That's another thing someone could do.
And what we could do is, I don't know how you do it, we can add resources for people after this.
I'll create an extra video I'll work with you and we could do a whole.
Because there are free resources and there are things out there, but when you're going through major grief, you don't have the capacity to do the research yourself.
Yeah.
I could not find a place in San Diego that would help people who had trauma over a death. We live in a city, there's millions and millions of people and there's nowhere for me to go.
Yeah.
There's people that get in car accidents and things. Now, there might be, and I couldn't find it. Yes.
Yeah.
But there's the COVID layer, right, as well. But back to a trauma experience. So I taking this course, and one of the assignments was to listen to this podcast. And I'm listening to the podcast, and a gentleman is describing a little bit of a bad scene, and he goes into how he was treated at the hospital afterwards. And I don't want to go too deep into what that was. And while I'm listening to it, I felt a lot of overwhelm in my body. I got sick to my stomach. My stomach turned, and I was like, I need to turn this fucking thing off. And then my mind went to, or do I just motor through it to check it off the list for homework?
For homework,
and it was like, no. And so I stopped it and felt into my body. And because was it going to be too much? Because sometimes when it's too much, it's dangerous to go in and so, or it feels dangerous, right? And so my inner voice, my intuition said, this is part of the surrendering. And I went into it, and I didn't know until 7 months after I found my best friend deceased that I had trauma with the cops. And that was the trauma that had come up, how I was treated after finding my best friend deceased. And, I don't necessarily blame them, and I'm not going to call the police and say I was mistreated, but, to be in shock.
To be a little bit more sensitive. And
I was in shock in the cold they were, you know, asking me question after question after question with no sensitivity. I'd ask for a break, and in a very cold and non-empathetic way, they would say, well, we can call our grief counselor on staff at the force. And it was like, I don't feel safe with you. That's the last thing I want is help from you.
Yeah.
And I wasn't a bitch. I'm in shock.
Yeah.
I think they should just bring a grief counselor right away if there's,
Yeah.
why aren't we doing that? Probably because of finances.
Yeah.
But the silver lining, and this is part of what I'm learning with grief, is, you know, there's waves, and by leaning into it, there are different aspects of at least myself, my heart, my life have expanded. So when I was going through that night and I'm feeling sick because of being reminded, and I couldn't call anybody because they had to do an investigation and they had to call her next of kin. So I'm kind of just stuck for like 4 or 5
just
hours
sitting
by
there.
myself. And I had met Emily's neighbor, Brittany, once. And she just was so welcoming. I got to use her bathroom and use her phone charger, and just to go knock on her door and just to get a break from the cops or the cold. And I was so grateful for that. And that kind of came up after that trauma feeling, traumatic. And that opened the door. So I've been in different grief phases, if you will.
Yeah. Because at first you were in shock, so you didn't even realize this happened. And then 7 months later, you realize, oh shit, like that's a whole other thing I'm dealing with, the way it was treated.
Because I'm focusing on my friend and my loss. I never thought about the cops.
Yeah. And as someone that's dealt 20 years ago, different stuff will come up all the time. Like it's a forever thing, you know, like this is going to come up in a few months, something else may come up, and next year and it gets like the time span in between. But my point is that when you deal with death, especially, I mean, any kind of death, things are going to come up and you got to process them and deal with them, however it is that you deal with them. Because if you don't, it builds up inside you. And I firmly believe that it can turn into sickness, or it can turn into mental health. It could just turn into a bunch of stuff that you don't want in your body.
I agree.
Right?
And also, I believe it opens up your capacity for living in other ways. So using myself as an example, just in finding my best friend deceased, my heart was broken open. I mean, it aches, it's broken, and yet it's bigger. And
what do you mean by that? What do you mean? It aches, it's broken, it's bigger. Like you can love more now?
It's more open.
More open.
I have more courage. I have more capacity to be vulnerable. I have more capacity to feel love. And coming back to Emily's neighbor, Brittany, once I realized, oh my gosh, I didn't realize I had trauma, and here was this safe place. And I was so grateful.
With someone you had met one time?
One time.
Yeah. And that's a good thing too, is like on the other side, you never know who you are for that person. So like, I would really encourage you to tune into your intuition. And if you feel like that some stranger needs your help or whatever, do it, because you don't know the longing effect. And I'm not even talking about like death, because this is, you know, but like sometimes you run into people and you could just feel that they need something. It might just be a friendly hello, a smile, a how are you? You know what I mean? Like those are the moments that like, and you may never see that person again, but that's what they'll remember.
And I'll circle back to a question you asked earlier, what can people do, right?
Yes.
So I go back to this, I'm like, oh my gosh, just her being kind. I didn't realize that my heart would be so full so many months later because of this worst moment in my life. She was the first person I told and hugged and gave me a safe space.
Yeah.
And then it opened the door for me. This is the phase I'm in, my grief phase right now.
And there's always different phases, guys.
I'm in a boy, am I grateful phase.
Explain that a little bit.
Well, and again, going back to what can people do, just showing up in a way that you can. So I'm going back and really honoring the people in my village. You know, I had called my sister and she's like, you can't be alone. I called my ex-boyfriend. Can you come? Emily died. He knew her. He was like the lickety split. Yeah. You know,
and that's your ex-boyfriend.
Exactly. And so the little things that people could do, they all add up. They all add up. And I would say one of the most significant things for me, especially in this weird space of grief is something my other best friend said to me. So we both have this, it's her niece and it's my best friend and she's my other best friend, right? So it's like we both have this horrific loss and we both have our own history of how we grieve. We're two different people and all of that. So it's like the two people I would call if shit hit the fan in my life. One is deceased and the other one is going through her own shit.
Because that's her niece.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
But that doesn't mean she hasn't supported me or I haven't supported her. But sometimes it becomes too much, right? It might be too much for her one day. It might be too much for me one day. But I feel like this was the most powerful thing or one of the most powerful things in my grief process. And when she said to me, this was months ago when it was still just, awful and fresh. She said to me, I can't talk about it because it was just too much.
Yeah.
And she said, but if you need to talk about it, you can. And it just blew me away. She was honoring herself in her own grief. And at the same time, I see you and I'm honoring you. She knows me. She knows I need to get it out a little bit more.
Yeah.
And,
She was saying, I can't talk about this, but I'll hear you.
Yes.
Right? And
Yes.
if that's all you can offer in that moment, then that's
it was everything.
Yeah.
If that were me, I'd just be like, I can't deal with it today. So for somebody to kind of, this is where I'm at in my grief and make their boundary what was safe for them, but open the door in such a loving and tending way. Like, I'm here for you though.
Yeah.
It's not comparable, best friend and niece. I have the extra layer of finding her and I can't speak for her, but
And that's a whole nother thing that we, like my brothers got shot and murdered, but I didn't find them. All right, hold up. This is like your 20-second Geena the Latina PSA. I need you to like, comment, subscribe below because we want to keep this show going. So if you're liking what you're hearing, please do us a favor and like, comment, subscribe below and follow us on Instagram and TikTok at the Geena the Latina Show. That's the Geena the Latina Show. I don't know why I can't talk. Back to the show. Dead, right? So that's a whole
other thing.
Whole other thing, right?
Yeah. But again, I'll go back to also an honor and a privilege. Like I got to give her a loving send off, you know?
Yeah. I keep staring at your shirt. I know what it means, but can you explain to everybody if you're looking, you wore that shirt today?
Sure. Of course I wore it on purpose. I'm going to explain it with my words, not Emily's words, but Emily made these stickers years ago and she was somebody that loved the band Fish.
Okay.
And she would go to the concerts and hand them out. And it says, I am rich in fun. And I see it as how she lived her life. She lived for joyful experiences and living life to the fullest. And I think that's what we should all do.
Yeah.
And it has become part of her legacy with her friends and everybody's carrying the tradition. I put one under my seat, her seat at Petco Park.
Yeah. She's a big Padres fan. She has season tickets and Emily used to go with you.
Yeah. We were the Goosebumps girls.
Oh, yeah. You guys were on TV and stuff.
Yeah.
Explain that moment just in case. Maybe if she looks familiar, it's because she went viral. Explain what happened.
Well, she was the brains behind the operation.
You guys made the... Yeah, go ahead and explain.
If anybody
They're
knows.
hardcore Padre fans, season ticket, go to every game.
So it was last year during the playoffs, a goose landed on the field in LA.
Yeah.
And then it became this thing in San Diego. It kind of became like our good luck charm. And I said to her, Emily, we're going to do a sign that says something with goose. Help me find something creative that, we can do. And this was one of the things she was so good at and so creative. And she gave me a list of things and I'm like, ooh, Goosebumps is it.
Mm-hmm. And then you tell
had
how
a
it
sign.
went. Had a sign, and then the TV stations picked it up. We even had you on my radio show. I was like,
Yeah.
oh, I know that girl. Let me call her real quick because it was. But then you had a goose outfit too.
I did.
Oh, you not allowed to say that?
Oh, you can.
Oh, okay, yeah. Because you had to sneak it in, right, and then put it under.
Well, yeah,
again.
snuck in the mask.
Yeah, stuck in the mask, and that was so. The goose was her. Was you?
Yeah, but we're known for the
Goosebumps.
The Goosebumps
sign.
So I held it, but she was the brains behind the operation, and people would see us in town and be like, "Are you the Goosebumps girls?"
Yeah, the Goosebumps.
And
girls.
it means so much more to me now. It was sorry, Geena. Sorry to your family. The game we beat LA.
Yeah, it's fine. It's fine. My family is crazy LA people.
That was like the best baseball game I had ever been to. So now it's even more meaningful
She was with
having
you.
Emily there. And it was magical. Baseball and how it rained and how we came, we slayed the dragon. You know?
One thing I want to talk about, and I quickly mentioned it, but I hate when people do this, and this is 20 years later. And I think part of this episode is also helping people who may be going through grief, but also educating those who haven't gone through that yet. Because once you do, you'll see what we're talking about. And until then, just take our word for it. I hate when I hear people judging how people are reacting after grief. So I've heard like, oh, they seem okay. Like, because they're still
Oh,
going to
yeah.
dinners and they're almost judging them like, man, they just lost someone and they're out to dinner, or they're just out someone, or on the flip side, oh, they need to get over it. Like they're too depressed. Or they're partying. I can't believe they're partying. They just lost their grandma. How are they out partying? You know what I mean? Like I hear so much of this stuff. And from speaking by experience, I went through so many different phases. I went through where I was depressed, didn't do shit for a whole year, wasn't eating. But then I went through like I was partying, and if you saw me on social media, you probably thought I was fine. But that doesn't mean like I was fine. You know what I mean? And my point is that everybody deals with grief differently, and it's not our place to judge them. And whenever I hear someone say that, I'm like, no, I will never judge someone how they grieve. Like one day they may be going to church, the next day they may be going to a TJ to party, whatever it is, that's their experience, and it's not our place to judge. Have you felt that at all? Or I guess it's been longer, so I've been around it, and it irks me when I hear people like assuming that they should act a certain way. You don't know how you're going to act. Like everybody acts differently, and like judging like, oh, they're fine now. Well, they're probably not fine. They probably go home and cry. They just put on a strong face right now. We don't know. We don't know. Do you have anything to say on that or no?
No, I agree with you. We all grieve differently and we need to respect that.
Yeah.
Absolutely. As far as that coming on me, I mean, people could be talking behind my back.
You don't know yet.
I don't know yet. But I will say with that is going back to our culture and society, it may have been 2 or 3 months after she passed, and then nobody, it was like it never happened.
Yeah,
and
right.
that was weird.
On,
so
right?
instead of it like, oh, you're grieving weird, it became like, well, this is weird. Like, I don't have to necessarily like talk about it with everybody. And then there were other members of Emily's family that kind of were feeling the same thing. So that felt healing. Not that they were going through the same thing, but like, oh, okay, I'm not alone in this.
Like, and so to be more clear, like what I'm hearing is that like, so they died and then everyone was all about it for 3 or 4 months, and then like life moves on.
Yeah, and even less than that. But again, I'm saying for me, the common denominator is the cultures. And
let's talk about that a little bit. Okay. When you keep saying the culture, like what culture have we become?
You mentioned your mom. I'm saying the American culture. So, I don't blame any person. In the past, I would have taken it a lot more personally. Why people can't show up, why people are saying weird things, why people aren't saying anything or look the other way or
like not acknowledging
or
it.
spitfiring too much but it's so uncomfortable.
Yeah.
My parents never talked about grief. It's not normal in our culture how we're typically, I believe, how we're raised.
To not talk about it. Like my brothers, we didn't talk about it for years. And even to this day, there are very few family members that can talk about it. And I try to bring up stories about my brothers to my niece and nephew because they didn't get to know their dad. So whenever it can come up, I can bring that up. But there'll be certain family members around that I wouldn't do that because they just still can't handle it. And that's part of our culture. Like we weren't taught. Someone dies, everyone cries by themselves in the room, no one talks about it, and you move on, and then you're still crying, but no one's talking about it. How can we change that? Like, what are we supposed to do?
I don't know what exactly we're supposed to. Well, I think we're doing it by having this conversation. Something needs to change, but it's going to start one person at a time. I'll use myself as an example. In my family, no one talked about their emotions. So how am I supposed to grieve and have all these emotions if that's how I was raised? And I'm not blaming my family. I think it's pretty normal in our culture. And then there's another component. When people talk about grief, a lot of people see it as being weak and vulnerable. Our culture is success and quick, and there's no time for that.
Yeah. So we need to make time for it. And I've always said, like, showing emotions actually is the strongest thing someone can do. It's easy to be, not acknowledge it and move on. It takes a
Mhm.
stronger person to sit in front of a camera and cry, or to be honest with their feelings, and the only reason why I know this, because in my job, at first I was like, not, I never talked about my brothers because I thought that, like, people would think I was ghetto, or like, oh my gosh, yeah, so, and I work in the entertainment world, so I felt like very judged, right? The second I talked about it on the radio, I've never had so many messages. Back then it was emails, so many emails from people saying, thank you for sharing. I lost someone, or not even if they lost someone, they just could just relate. And that's when I realized, like, shit, like, the more I'm open with this, and I've told this story so many times on different platforms and different speeches and all these things, the more I'm open with this, the more it actually connects me with people. So I do try to talk about it. But within my own family, I will say we have a lot of work to do. And then that's more for me out of respect for their feelings.
Mhm.
But we've tried, like, me and my boyfriend, like, we had, like, it would have been my brother's 40th birthday. So we had like a birthday cake
Mm.
for him, and it's like, why didn't we do this before? Like, have a shot for him, and it's just like, why did we, like, just push it out of the way almost, and even though it was weird because I talk about it publicly, but then we still weren't,
Mhm.
like, celebrating them. Like, why are we not celebrating the people we love? Because it's
Mhm.
tough. And some days
Yeah.
I don't wanna talk about it, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But some days, if you're feeling better, like, why not celebrate? Why not, me and you are big into Dia de los Muertos, and we're gonna
Mhm.
have, me and Amy and another friend, Daphne, who's here today too, we're gonna have a dinner, and we're gonna bring our favorite, like, Emily's favorite food or drink or whatever. I'm gonna bring my brother's, which was Doritos. Uh, I'm sure he ate something else with it. And then we're just gonna all feast, and Daphne's gonna bring something from her mom, and we're just all gonna feast and celebrate our loved ones as if they're there, because we
And
do feel
yeah,
they're there.
and I think one step is to somehow normalize grief, but honoring them, remembering them, celebrating them is a way to do it, not just on Day of the Dead.
Yeah.
But I love that it has infiltrated our culture
That at
to
least it's a
begin that.
at least it's the first step.
This
Thank
is
you,
huge.
Coco. Thank you,
Yes.
Coco, right?
Agreed.
Because Coco made it like, okay, now we can have these fiestas. If you don't know, if you're not Latino, Dia de los Muertos is celebrated on November 1st and 2nd. And you celebrate your loved ones, and it's a celebration, right? So all those schools, it's not a scary thing. It's more of like,
Mhm.
you're happy and you dance, you eat their favorite foods,
And
you
you share
drink, you share stories.
stories.
It's a happy thing. If you haven't seen Coco, I think they did a great job.
Absolutely.
Great job
And
of
keeping
explaining
it
what it is.
light as far
Yeah.
as the subject.
And making it a celebration, right? And you actually went to where, Mexico City for Dia de los Muertos? Or
Now
where
I'm
did you
drawing
go?
a blank. I drove 8 hours south of Mexico. It was in
'Cause in
outside of Morelia.
Okay, and that's where they, like, I wanna go there because they have these huge, like, festivals of Dia de los Muertos. I mean,
Oh,
everything's
I was
decked
in a
out.
graveyard at midnight.
Talk about that a little bit, because a lot of people don't even know that exists, and I want to go so
I mean,
bad.
there were people at their loved ones' grave sites, and we kind of walked through, and people honored it,
Yeah.
but to see the different ofrendas
Ofrenda.
set
So
up.
ofrendos are little, like, altars that you make for your loved ones, right? And again, it's a celebration. It's to remember. And so many times we put these people's pictures away,
Mm-hmm.
instead, like, it's in a little ofrenda. And
Mm-hmm.
like, in our culture, cemeteries are, like, scary and, like, oh my God, you only go whatever. But, like, if you celebrate in, like, the Mexican culture, and even not even how I grew up, I'm like super, like, they make ofrendas. It's actually I went to a cemetery in Sayulita, Mexico. It's one of the most beautiful cemeteries. They decorate there's all these lights. I went there at night. Now I know that sounds creepy as fuck, but it's the same
Oh,
thing.
I was there at midnight.
At
Yeah.
midnight, right? It's the most beautiful experience. To this day, it's one of the most beautiful experiences of, like, really celebrating life and how we
Mm-hmm.
should be doing that. So I'm trying to bring that here in my family, at least, right? But wasn't it such a beautiful experience?
It was.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
was. Yeah.
Magical
It
almost. And
was.
we're talking about cemeteries and quote unquote dead people, but it's not dead people, because to us, their souls live on, right?
Yeah.
And we feel their energy in it, and that's a whole nother episode, because we're running out of time. But, like, for me, I know my brothers, like, after they died, I didn't, but, like, I don't know what I thought before, but after they died, I know that our people who are past are still living with us because they will give you signs. They will
Mhm.
turn on lights. They will play Biggie all of a sudden. I should have been wearing my Biggie sweatshirt for this one because that's like my brothers do that all the
Mhm.
time. And
Mhm.
you can sit here and think I'm crazy, but I know for 20 years I can literally feel my brother's presence. Like if I ask them for a sign right now, they may like turn off a light or do something, right?
Mhm.
And I think it's really important when you lose someone to really explore that because it's so healing when you
Mhm.
know like your loved ones are there. Like I'm sure I don't know if Emily's given you signs yet, but like for me, like hummingbirds and like songs on the radio and numbers and just conversation. Someone will say something that my brother said, and I'm like, how did they, and they're just
Mhm.
move on with their those are and to me that's been so healing to recognize those moments and know that they're still here with me. So if you have lost someone, I would encourage you to look into that and look for signs and know you're not crazy. Like a lot of people like to say, oh, that's just your imagination. No, you can, if you feel goosebumps when a song comes on the radio that used to be your guys' song, that's not a coincidence. That's them playing
And
it
the
for you
timing is usually,
to say hello, right?
yeah,
Can
plays
we
a
share
part
a little
too.
bit of those moments? Because I know me and you always talk about those moments, and you're so big on those, and even with your grandparents and those kind of moments. Because I think some people may be new to this and be like, "Wait, what?"
Yeah, I
Like,
didn't believe in it either
I didn't
until
believe.
my grandparents passed away, and then things started happening where I couldn't deny.
Yeah, can you give one example of that? Anything come to mind? There's so many,
There's
right?
so
At this
many,
point,
but
there's so
but
many that you cannot deny.
well, I'll share the first story that came to mind. I was taking a class years ago and I do morning walks in my little town. And this woman said, throw your arms up in the air and channel healing light and this and this. And I thought, that's a little too much, you know? And in my mind's eye, I said, Grandma and Grandpa, if this shit's for real, show me a fucking sign. And I took one step in front of me and our last name was etched in cement in an random alleyway in Ocean Beach. And I remember walking away and I'm like, oh my God, am I turning into one of those people or have I gone crazy?
Right?
And so I had to go
Like,
back the next day to see if it actually, I mean, the timing of my next step was my
and you,
last name, which is O'Connor, which is kind of rare, at least here
yeah,
in the States.
yeah, and you
And
right
it was
after you
2 feet.
asked for it,
Yeah. Yeah.
and once and no, you weren't crazy. You went right.
Yeah.
You went back. It
And
was
that's
there.
just one, but
One of like
that was
me and
one
her
of the
talk
big
about this
ones
stuff
that
all
opened
the
it up for
time.
me.
It's so healing to know that your loved ones are still around, and once you're open to that and
Yeah.
hearing them and not freaked out by it. Like my brothers hide shit from me all the time, and even my boyfriend knows. Like, oh, you can't find something where they hide it. We'll find it in like 3 weeks because that was their nature. Their like playful nature. Like, and it will all of a sudden be my glasses, and then all of a sudden they're right on my table, and no one could find them for
Yeah.
3 weeks. Now other people might think that's freaky. We think that we love it because it's like, and my boyfriend and his son, they all believe they've seen it's like undeniable.
And can I share one thing that maybe people can do if that's
Sure.
just a little too much for them
Too much
or they're
for them,
not
yeah, we're a little.
No, I mean it's magical.
It is.
I mean when you experience it, and again, I didn't believe in it before I
Yeah,
experienced
me
it.
neither.
But another way is, and so I have both aspects with Emily. I have been given signs. And then if you take the spirituality, the woo-woo signs out of it, there's still a way you can carry them with you. And so for me, I'm doing, it's like twofold. I'm leaning into my grief and the loss. So I'm not focusing on the past, but I'm still bringing her forward. So like today, I did a little ritual
Okay.
and I felt her energy, and again, this is just when anybody can think of their loved one. I pictured her being a little sassy in a loving way, like you're wearing a t-shirt on the podcast.
Like that's what something she would say.
But
yeah.
also like you're wearing my rich and like in a so you can still tap into how the people made you feel. What would they say? You can still feel them in your heart.
Yeah.
We all have access to that. I
Yeah.
mean, even if you think of a friend that's still living or a family member that you haven't seen in a while, you can still how they make you feel or have a memory and there's a way you can bring them forward in your life. And for me, that has been probably the number one thing in my healing is finding a way to still bring her with me and honor her life and continue. There's something called continuing bonds. So
What is that?
the old school, and I'm not an expert by any means, but so the old school way of grief is they, put the pictures away, you got to let go and move on. And now they're coming out with research saying when people share stories and remember the person, it's actually very healing.
It is.
And I
It is.
find that. And so, like, for me, the people that I can speak and share stories about Emily, and not necessarily all the dark stuff or my grief, some of that too, that is very healing and it keeps her alive.
It
I mean,
does. It does.
yeah.
So I think what we're getting from this, and we went a lot in this, is that it is good and great to keep the memories alive, however it is. I know people that like carry things with them of that memories, like whatever it is that works for you, and understanding that grief comes in all different forms and will come in all different waves, probably for the rest of your life, right? It does get better, I will say, but I just cried about my brothers and it's been 20 years, so it never goes away. But for me, like finding people like you and other people in my life has been very healing to be able to share, because if you've gone through the similar things, you can relate to each other, right? Is there anything last? I know you wanted to come on here, and we'll put at the end, like, in memory of Emily. Is there anything last thing that you want to share, or I know it was part of her legacy for you to come on here before we wrap up, I guess.
I guess not necessarily, but I'll share what came to mind.
Yeah.
Love your people. Yeah. Love them, because you never know.
Yeah.
You never know.
Yeah.
You never know.
Thank you.
Thank you.